All right, we're going to go over the roadmap, which is going to take place for the second half of the year. There's a ton of interesting things that are going to be happening. They also released a new promo code right here. Chapter 2 is here, and that is for 20,000 Intel and 150 power cores. So there was a live stream on Twitch, which I did watch. It's about an hour long. Most of the discussion over there was about mustaches and beards. I mean, people with hair, am I right? We're going to go over all the details. There was a lot of things in there that I had heard before, and it looks like they're moving forward on. But right now, we are in the first chapter of the Nihilus saga, and that's like a one-year saga. And chapter 2 is around the corner. To me, this looks like Blastar. They did not give the name, but I believe that is the rumor. And the word on the street is that is going to be the next legendary character. We're going to go over this infographic, but I've got my own notes. So at the end, I'm going to go over the notes of things that were in the live stream, right? It was a live Q&A. It was actually playing on Twitch real time, and there were questions coming in, which is I think is a big deal for the developers to see, because also, they have to kind of confront some of the negative criticism, or they ignore it, which is also super interesting for me to see what questions they take and what questions they don't take. And believe me, they don't take all the questions, but they did see the questions. And I think that is good for developers to have some sort of accountability, if you will, and be able to interact with the community and not be able to avoid the issues. And for example, there was a question about the negative zones, and he straight up said, yeah, going in and having to play it 14 days in a row is not fun. And both of them essentially stated that that was not a good experience for them. And RJ, who's the main guy over there, over at Marvel Strike Force, essentially said he liked the idea of Negative Zone and it was fun to play initially, but the implementation and the way that it was brought out and the way that it felt to the community was undesirable. So let's go over all of the items here on this infographic that they provided. We got chapter 2. The community largely is believing that this is Blastar, right? And we'll just say that it is. There are rumors, there are leaks. I have zero official information, but to me, that seems like a likelihood. There's going to be a new raid, and they gave the timetable for the new raid, and that is going to be in August. They did not give dates for the new raid or anything like that. Now, they did mention a new mutant team coming to the game by the end of the year. Now, the question that was brought to them specifically was, is this a mutant raid team? And he didn't directly answer that. In fact, he didn't confirm it, which made me kind of believe on the way that it was worded that it is not a mutant raid team. But that does make a lot of sense to me. That's what I was expecting. He did say it was coming by the end of the year, and there was a poll done about the Hellfire team. So I'm going to assume that the next raid will be a Hellfire mutant raid team, but they did not say that. All they did say is that there is a new raid coming in August, and that by the end of the year, there was going to be another mutant team. Cross-platform connections. So this was a couple different things. They talked about the integration with Discord. They said that is underway. They also made mention that Marvel Strike Force was one of the first. Actually, he said that we're the first mobile game to have some sort of direct interaction with Discord. I don't know if that's true. I thought some other games were doing that as well. But he did state that. And then kind of out of nowhere, and I think that RJ kind of blindsided Pathfinder and said, yes, we're going to get a web-based version of Marvel Strike Force so that you will be able to play Marvel Strike Force directly on the website, msf.gg. Now, I currently play Marvel Strike Force on an Android emulator. There's a couple of them out there that work. The one that I use is called LD Player, but I've also used BlueStacks, Mimu, Nox, and results may vary. And that's been a frustrating experience in general because the game is not optimized for emulators, and I found that it has been glitchy over the years. I've been trying different ones for the last 7 years, and results may vary. So this is going to be a web-based, and I suspected that something like this would happen. And the reason why we have not had a PC client, I've speculated that has something to do with licensing and Marvel, perhaps contracts, perhaps fees. Don't know for sure. And maybe the type of game that Marvel Strike Force, another game, has some sort of contract with Marvel. I don't actually know, but I know that there are complications. And from what I've seen with the developers and my direct interactions, that they had a strong desire to make a PC client for Marvel Strike Force, and it wasn't really up to them to do that. And in some ways, it's extremely advantageous for a developer to develop a PC client because the fees that are paid to Google and app when a in-app purchase is processed, I've heard numbers as high as 30%. There have been tons of lawsuits in the media, specifically with Epic and the Fortnite mobile game. And a lot of developers have gone out of their way to make PC clients or web stores to sidestep those fees, which are about 30%. So I know that they've wanted to make a PC client, but there were other circumstances that were out of their hands where they were unable to do it. And it looks like that is going to lead to a web-based, web-playable MSF.GG version of Marvel Strike Force. I have no idea what that will look like. I'm curious to try it out, and frankly, my expectations are pretty low because LD Player is the best that we have, and it is okay. So I don't know if they were planning on talking about it. Now, they did talk about a new Battle World boss, and that is going to be Sentry. They specifically said that he was going to be a plug-and-play character and have a purpose and a functionality in that he was on his own in a way similar to that of Null, and that he would not be directly tied to the Thunderbolt team. And he made some comment that Sentry was kind of outside of the Thunderbolt team, which is true if you've seen the movie. There also was a lot of discussion on how we're going to be able to get null shards once the battle world ends. There were several people saying that they were going to be like 25 shards short, and he expressed a desire to not just give them away in a calendar. He felt that playing in Battle World in some way would be a good way of earning them, and maybe that meant that they would go into the Battle World store. That's the way that I interpreted it, is that null shards would be available in the Battle World store. Character upgrades. Now, this was specifically in mention to Purple 4 ISOs and 5. So they said already earlier that that was coming by the end of the year. I'm curious to see if Purple 4 and Purple 5 will have some sort of character and event tied to it in the way that Odin was released. I feel like there is a big gap between Professor X and Annihilus, and if we have a mid-chapter, mid-year, whatever you want to call it, character that is important, like Odin is important, that would highly appeal to me. They did not specifically say that, but I know that is something that I would make me very excited about, is if there was some sort of event tied to around having Purple ISO 5 and, you know, played out like a dark dimension. Lastly, there was mention of War 2.0. We've talked about that before, but there were no specific details whatsoever. Now, I'm going to just go over some of the notes that I had, as well as there were some notes, and I got a big shout out to Animan85. He said, new raid early August, cross-platform, finally able to play the game from MarvelStrikeForce.com instead of having to use BlueStacks or whatever. Chapter 2, Legendary, rumored to be Blaster, picture all but confirms. Next Battle World boss confirmed to be Sentry. Purple ISO 4 and 5 is coming. Now, some of the things that I'm going to go over here that are on my yellow boomer pad is going to be things that just the way that I interpreted the way that the conversation went. They were talking about some possible changes to the way that red stars were distributed on Quasar. Or the next legendary rather. And he seemed to suggest he wasn't 100% satisfied with the way that the Scourge events worked out, in that how the red stars were acquired by the players. He just said he wasn't really satisfied with that. Sounded like he was pretty okay with the way that the yellow stars went out, but not so much on the red star. He talked about there were going to be tweaks to the Intel store. Now, he specifically was not calling it the Intel store. That's just what I wrote down in my notes. I believe he was referring to the chapter store. So right now we have an Intel store that'll be expiring in about a month from now, and there will be a new name of the store. It'll be some sort of other currency, which we don't have a name for, but he was saying that there were going to be some sort of tweaks to it. Something that he said was somewhat controversial, because I saw a lot of comments pop up where he, basically said that we should be thanking him for. No, he didn't say it like that. What he alluded to is that we have a lot of Intel, and he was very happy with the amount of Intel was going out there. And I saw a lot of comments pointing up and saying, that's not true, dude. Anyways, he just made it sound like, oh, you just need to add it up. You're getting a ton. And I don't know, man. If you're trying to get Gear Tier 20 and the characters, I don't see how that is remotely true. Shop credits, there is an issue that I've talked about at length for newer players and mid-game players. And he said that they were not happy with the way that was turning out, and that they were going to be doing something. He felt that newer players, I know this to be true. He didn't like the idea of newer players converting Intel to shop currency, because I know when I started a new account, which was not that long ago, it was like, what do I buy with these shop credits? And I ended up buying a lot of T4s, but I really didn't need Gear Tier 20s. I mean, when I'm level 50, I don't need Gear Tier 20s, and it almost felt like converting them was the best thing, and they said that they were not comfortable with that. They mentioned that there was going to be a brand new environment brought to the game that is going to be centered around the Fantastic Four, and they suggested that there was going to be, well, they didn't explicitly say that there were going to be Thing and Torch diamonds, but I got the feeling that that was true. They also mentioned access to the costumes, and there was a ton of questions that came in from the community surrounding the costume store, and they alluded to that there would be some sort of access to that. I'm going to go full screen so you can see my beautiful shiny head. Captain Britain diamonds, they said soon, TM. There was some questions about getting a Doom and Magneto rework, and he said that nope, and that he was more likely to introduce variations of those characters than rework them. That was my interpretation of the way that he answered the question. War changes. Well, the war changes. The only thing that he mentioned specifically is getting rid of the 3D helicarrier that when you load into war, which is the reason why it takes so long to load into war. So he talked about removal of that and putting some sort of 2D asset to make access to war faster. It's pretty annoying if you ask me. We talked about that. They talked about some quality of life changes, and the question came up with a lose button, which is kind of important inside of Cosmic Crucible when you're playing up against Phoenix, and let's say Phoenix dies and her summons there, and you want to lose the battle because the Phoenix essentially is dead once she goes into the summon form and will not come back on the next match. And also for sacking teams, loading in with minions, being able to hit lose instead of waiting the entire 5 minutes just to have some sort of optimal cooldowns on your opposing team and or exhausted. So that was a question. He said there's something they're interested in. Something that they said that they were working on was some sort of visual representation of whether or not the team you were playing had their awakened abilities, which is somewhat important in certain situations. Currently, we don't have that, but I know that I was somewhat worried about the Shadow King awakened passive ability inside of War on defense. Sometimes that presents some problems right now currently when we talk about the Omega Red Phoenix Force and the Phoenix Force team on what awakened abilities they had. No way of knowing. So they were talking about creating some sort of UI where you'd be able to see that. So that is all that I have for today. I don't know if you got anything else out from the live stream, if you personally watched it. Put down in the comment section if any of that is of high interest to you. What do you think they left out? And bye for now.